Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our live viewers tuning in from around the world today. My name is Michael Jonga, and after trending topics and events that have been taking place in the aviation industry from a media point of view and perspective. More topics will be discussed in depth by the various aviation leaders and professionals. Free to watch. All you need to do is register in advance and you have access to the conference and to an aviation networking platform with over 500 C-level executives. The networking platform will be available in the video's description below. I'd also like to take the time to mention L. Harris as the event's main training providers as well as airframe manufacturers. During today, additionally, I'd like to invite Reeds. In your opinion, when do you think the market will recover? We will be, without further ado, I'd also like to welcome today's panel of speakers. Joining me from the AeroTime Hub media team, Chief, we were still facing the heat of the pandemic. And now the second event is taking place in September. These two periods, maybe.
So, as you have mentioned, the first event taking place in June is soundings of the lockdowns. While throughout the summers, we know many airlines started reinstating flights, recovering, although slowly. The plans and the strategies outlined back then are now slowly but starting to be just yesterday that aircraft leasing company BOC Aviation is apparently, well, reportedly by AirAsia, suing. We're discussing the situation in leasing, and they were saying that, well, the lessors were sort of not see the first signs in them coming, and I expect that would be happening across all areas of aviation.
All areas of the industry. And Regis, what's your opinion on that standpoint, the two different...
grounding their aircraft, cutting capacity throughout, and as throughout the summer they were reinstating flights slowly. But I think one thing that has changed is that aviation calls for testing instead of quarantining. So I think there has been a lot of more focus on what can we do proactively to fight the virus and still keep our economy and the industry going. The unions surprisingly are in the same unison as the airlines, calling for the start of flying, calling for back again and stand on its feet firmly. So I think it's been surprising, especially the cost-cutting measures to save jobs. You know, Ryanair has been established, so it was a surprising move as well. Even with them, again taking salary cuts but saving jobs. So I think that was the surprising, but I think a welcome trend to save jobs.
On what Regis was talking about, there have been a lot of movements and changes in the fleet composition of many airline bodies in the industry and are approaching fleet structure.
Well, I would say that the situation that the airlines find themselves in at the moment, but international are responding accordingly and changing their fleets accordingly, because the wide bodies are gone, so the narrow bodies are well, perhaps parked more than retired, but the tendencies come hand in hand.
Oh, showing. And Regis as well, do you...
We'll see a much homogenized fleet in the air, so I think as an aviation geek it will be sad to see some of the aircraft go, but I think we'll see all but few examples of the A380, A340 and Boeing 747 disappears. Well, of course the 747 still has a role in cargo, but as a passenger aircraft...
Okay, taking place. How significant was the move for airlines to take on passenger to cargo? Was that? Maybe Jivile?
Yeah.
Well, looking from the news perspective, so these were very significant. In reality, it probably wasn't as big as it appears, although surprisingly, Asiana Airlines, they actually managed to turn...
Asiana Airlines, like we wouldn't expect an airline to make a profit this time, but I think like they were the exception, and for many airlines, the cargo operations, even like taking out seats in their passenger aircraft and taking up cargo, has helped to cover at least some of the expenses that they have on a daily basis, you know, at least at some level.
Revenue
yeah.
Okay, and even just still talking on this changing aspect, we've seen a lot of changes on the airline aspect. How about for the airport out of the pandemic into like a rebuilding phase?
Yeah, I think we'll see a lot of less interaction. The person checking it, just scanning your
Free
ticket,
kiosk,
and you go. Yeah, I think the digitalization process was maybe not necessarily.
Personally, I'm a bit skeptical about the digitalization.
Okay.
It appears that it's definitely a buzzword at the moment, and many analysts believe that this crisis will be the catalyst for the aviation industry as a whole to turn web by airlines and airports, so by the companies facing the customers directly from the companies that did not notice many movement in other areas and didn't announce.
In aggressive strategies for some airline and market players as well. How has that played out, especially
9 new bases in Europe, like throughout the heat of the crisis, like it announced new bases that it's establishing. So it was quite surprising. I think it hurt the airline a lot because it's still an investment. You still have to take in the aircraft because Wizz Air is still taking up, or it can propel Wizz Air into new heights, and probably they might even challenge Ryanair.
behavior from LLCs and legacy carriers as well? Could you maybe just highlight some of those differences in how these carriers have been acting in the industry?
I think the most a public company, but not like turning to their states and asking for money, except maybe Norwegian, of course.
Okay.
I would like to disagree with you because I was being dependent on the states, being able to turn the profit on their own. So I've checked what they did at the beginning of pandemic, and it seems that basically most of them have at some point took less of it than relying completely on the bailouts.
And even since you've just mentioned bailouts, you see we've noticed a considerable amount of bankruptcy proceedings from some airlines within the industry. And the current notion is that even though the pandemic brought in negative conditions for revenue generation, the pandemic itself just further accelerated and highlighted some of the inefficiencies and flaws that were in the business.
Say that the expectation was definitely that the airlines that have not been profitable before the crisis would go bankrupt and liquidated, although there were bankruptcies. And we have seen at least several examples of the governments extending some financial aid to the airlines that are suffering and had been suffering before.
That we didn't have much liquidations yet. I honestly expected Norwegian to go down, but state aid is there. I guess investors are there as well. Virgin Australia was not in the ownership, new capital, and it was quite surprising. I don't know, maybe the investors are.
Technical break.